This is a critical moment for our nation. We must act decisively now.
Get out of my pub! Go on!
Calm yourself down.
Get out of my pub!
Calm down. Sorry, can you keep out of the way?
Thank you. I'm sorry, I am the landlord. He's the landlord. That man is not allowed in my pub. It's the landlord.
Keir Starmer, a nation on the brink. Keir Starmer's hand, gripping the mahogany desk's edge, was shaking, a tremor that had nothing to do with the chill of the air-conditioned cabinet room. It was a quake born of dread, a chilling acknowledgement of the catastrophic miscalculation he'd made. Just 3 weeks ago, announcing the emergency tax restructuring had felt like an inevitable, painful necessity, a bitter tonic for a broken economy. Now, looking out the reinforced window of number 10, the necessity had morphed into the fuse of a powder keg. Outside the gates, the volume of the crowd was no longer a chant. It was a rhythmic, pulsing thump, a sound that vibrated through the very foundation of the centuries-old building. It was the sound of a deeply fractured nation, and at its core, a terrifying confluence. The desperate anger of working-class families, compounded by the steely, organized presence of the armed forces. It wasn't the full military, not yet, but the sight of off-duty, reservist, and even active-duty personnel, young men and women still sharp-edged, still commanding, mingling with the civilian protesters, had sent a jolt of ice through every member of the government. They weren't rioting, they were occupying, a silent, disciplined dissent that spoke volumes. 100 meters from the iconic black door, a young woman in fatigues, her face grim and set, stood on an overturned dustbin, not shouting, but using a megaphone to read aloud the names of battalions whose pensions would be devastated by the new levy. Each name was met with a deafening roar of approval, a sound of loyalty transferred from the crown to the streets. Starmer closed his eyes, remembering the intel briefing where a grim-faced general had stated, "Sir, this is not a labor dispute. It's a crisis of command. They believe you have broken the covenant." A sharp rap on the door, and the National Security Advisor, a man whose composure was legendary, entered without waiting for permission. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a new, raw fear. He held a small, unfolded sheet of paper. "Prime Minister," he breathed, his voice tight, "we have a problem, a major problem. The Scottish regiment stationed at Catterick, they've just issued a statement, not a demand, a declaration. They state they will not be deployed against the people of the United Kingdom, and they are calling on other units to stand down." Starmer felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. Catterick wasn't a small base, it was massive, a strategic core. An open refusal of orders was mutiny, but an announcement to the nation was something far, far worse. It was a challenge to the established order, a public, unambiguous rejection of the elected government's authority. He snatched the paper. The language was formal, almost painfully respectful, which only made its treasonous content more chilling. They hadn't just refused to deploy, they had effectively claimed a moral ground, positioning themselves as the true protectors of the people against the state. Starmer looked up, his gaze locking with the NSA's. "What is the Home Secretary doing?" he demanded, his voice a ragged rasp. "Have they contacted the Chief of the General Staff? We need to know who is still following orders." The NSA swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "The Home Secretary, Prime Minister, he's unreachable. His security detail reports he hasn't returned any calls in 2 hours. In General Hawthorne, he's convened an emergency meeting with the 4 command heads. They're not answering calls from number 10 or the Ministry of Defense. They are talking amongst themselves." Starmer's mind raced, a terrifying image taking shape, a military leadership cutting him out, isolating him as the unrest swelled. He was losing control of the very instruments meant to enforce his will. He walked back to the window, the muffled thump outside now feeling less like an external threat and more like the beating of a corrupted heart about to explode. This wasn't just about taxes anymore. It was about the survival of the government and his freedom, possibly his life. But the worst was yet to come, and the new message arriving from a surprising source would seal the terror. Isolation and the unseen enemy. The silence in the cabinet room, once a symbol of solemn authority, was now a hollow echo of Starmer's isolation. He stood paralyzed by the window, the paper from the Catterick Regiment crumpling in his white-knuckled fist. The refusal of the 4 command heads to communicate directly with him felt like a physical wall slamming shut. He wasn't just losing control, he was being actively contained. The NSA, still hovering near the door, cleared his throat, a sound sharp enough to make Starmer flinch. "Prime Minister," the NSA said, his voice dropping to a near inaudible level. "We've intercepted a signal. It's a closed-loop broadcast, military encryption, old protocol, almost vintage, used for high-security field communications. It originated near Aldershot." Aldershot, the historical heart of the British Army. Starmer turned slowly, his eyes burning with an intense, desperate inquiry. "What was the content?" he managed to ask, the words scraping out. The NSA hesitated, his gaze darting nervously to the closed door, ensuring their conversation remained shielded. "It was short, sir. A 3-word phrase repeated 4 times, followed by a set of coordinates. The phrase was, 'The line is drawn.'" Starmer felt the blood drain from his face, leaving a cold, clammy film on his skin. This wasn't the spontaneous dissent of angered soldiers. This was organized, deliberate subversion. "The line is drawn." It sounded like the prelude to civil war, a stark announcement of allegiance shifting. And the coordinates? They would mark a designated meeting point, a place where dissenting units, emboldened by the Catterick Declaration and the perceived weakness of the central government, would consolidate. "Map those coordinates, now," Starmer commanded, his voice regaining a desperate edge of authority, "and send a direct, unsecured message to General Hawthorne. Say this: I authorize the immediate suspension of the tax restructuring, pending a full review. Meet me at Checkers tonight, now, alone." It was a reckless gambit, an attempt to bypass the chain of command, to bribe the military leadership back into compliance with a retreat. But the government's retreat on the tax was a sign of weakness the protesters would seize upon immediately. As the NSA frantically began inputting the coordinates into a secure terminal, the exterior sound abruptly changed. The low, ominous thump of the massed protesters was replaced by a sharper, more sporadic noise, screaming, shouts of alarm, and the sound of heavy metal striking stone. Starmer rushed back to the window. Down Whitehall, a column of vehicles had appeared. Not police carriers, but civilian-grade trucks and vans, painted matte green, looking hastily commandeered. They weren't coming towards the main gate, they were blocking the road, cutting off the main thoroughfare. And from the rear of the vehicles, figures in civilian clothes but carrying professional-grade backpacks and communications equipment were fanning out, moving with chilling speed and coordination. They weren't the protesters. They were too professional, too disciplined. "Who are those people?" Starmer demanded, pointing a trembling finger at the emerging figures. The NSA, glued to the computer screen, glanced up, his face etched with pure panic. "Sir, those coordinates, they map not to a military base, but to an abandoned staging ground near Heathrow. And look at this. This is the new message." He spun the screen around. A single cryptic line of text was displayed. "Compliance is no longer an option. The People's Guard accepts your resignation." The tension in the room snapped taut, suffocating. The People's Guard, a name Starmer had only seen in far-right extremist online forums, dismissed as fringe lunatics. But fringe lunatics don't intercept military communication loops or deploy with this level of tactical efficiency. This was the moment of full realization. The political protest had been hijacked, weaponized by a terrifying organized third party with military training and a clear objective. They weren't just protesting the tax, they were staging a full-scale, non-sanctioned coup. The Home Secretary wasn't unreachable, he was likely detained. The military leadership wasn't just debating, they were waiting, seeing which side would prevail. Starmer was alone, surrounded by a silent, unseen enemy who now demanded his resignation.
and the next sound to penetrate the security of number 10 would signify the beginning of the true assault.